Okay. All right. So we usually get started around this time. Give everybody a 5 minutes. I expect others to join us as we go on. And I'm gonna also do a post online so persons might join from the Instagram page. But guys, we're in for a very, very important and exciting session with the one and only Lance Whittaker. Before I introduce him, as you know, or you probably don't know, you should know, we're talking about mastering interviews and building athlete stories. And I have a quick little icebreaker for everyone who is here right now. I want you to type into the chat. So the question is, what's one question a reporter should never ask an athlete? What's one question you think a reporter should never ask an athlete, if there's any such thing? I don't know if Lance, if you have any ideas on what that would sound like. You have any no-go zones with athletes? But let's see. Anybody have anything to say about that?
I don't know. Some of them things are a little occasion specific, you know.
Yeah, it sounds very contextual.
Yes, yeah, you know. So I don't know if you could just blanket say you could never ask. It depends on who the athlete is and what is happening with the athlete at the time. That you might have some no-nos, but let's hear what the participants have. They might have some ideas, because I see Dylan saying something about too personal questions, because depends on the personalities of the people too, because athletes differ, you know, and you have athletes who are shy and you have athletes who don't really embrace too much of a publicity platform. So
how do you feel about losing? What they were thinking when they made a mistake? Anika. Why didn't you do better? Wow. I love it. Those of you just joining, we're doing a little icebreaker, a quick thing. We're just saying if there are any questions that are out of bounds for athletes, or you should never ask an athlete as a reporter. So if you want to leave a comment there, and I'm sure Lance will chip in, and we'll get around to a lot of details where that is concerned. But as he's saying, it does sound like it could very much be contextual. All right. Do you feel like you disappointed the fans? I disappointed myself. Did you guys deserve the win with such a poor performance? Wow.
That sounds a bit caustic, you know. I don't think any winner would want to answer a question like that.
Interesting. All right. These are good starters, guys. Thank you so much. So I'm sure all of us recognize Lance's face, but I'm going to do a quick little intro. You know, Lance has been in the media industry since 1984. That's when you started with the RJR Gleaner Sports Phone. Wait, hold on. You started with the RJR Group in 1984, correct?
Radio. It was Radio Jamaica, yeah. At that time, the RJR Group did not include TVJ. They had not yet acquired TVJ, yeah. So it was just straight radio when I started in 84.
So in 1984, he's been working in media as a veteran sports journalist now, and a distinguished career spanning 4 decades, guys. He has a prominent roles. He's held roles such as sports director at the Caribbean Media Corporation, director of sports at the Caribbean Media Corporation, and currently serves as vice president and executive producer at Sportsmax and anchor to the Sports Zone, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
All right. He's also Jamaica Sports Journalist of the Year twice, and the RJR Glean of Sports Foundation's Chairman Award. He won it in January 2022. So he's here to talk to us about interviews, mastering them, and athlete stories. And Lance, I want to hand over to you and just thank you for making the time to spend with us right now. Just a little housekeeping, guys. If you have questions, you can type it in the chat, or or raise your hand, and we'll address them as they come in at the right times. And then we'll also have a section for afterwards, a little time afterwards, after the presentation, for you to ask more questions. But without further ado, let's get into it. Lance, Mr. Lance Whittaker, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Really appreciate this opportunity to be a part of the Goalside reporters training project that you have. I just want to make sure I can get my power slides going. You are seeing something there now, would you?
Yes, we are seeing it. Perfect.
Okay. All right. I want to be able to move it. How did I do this again? I remember. Okay. Yeah. All right. So welcome everyone. It really is a pleasure for me to be involved in this project. I know it started from last year, and I got rave reviews about what it has meant to you. I remember when I was young, before I got into the business, I was very passionate about getting involved in the media because I am at heart a sports loving person. I played sport from my very earliest years. I played football and cricket for my primary school, Mona Primary. I went to Wolmer's and played football and cricket at the course level. So I've been steeped in sports for pretty much all my life. I must say that while I was in school, I didn't see being a broadcaster as a career, but as I completed my schooling and started to think about what I wanted to do with my life professionally, it was so, like, it was a pull for me to get involved with the media, particularly radio, because at that time I was really addicted to radio, even more than television at the time. So, it was a dream of mine to get this job, and I am very willing and enthusiastic about encouraging people to take this path as a career, because if you love sports and you love the media, it is very fulfilling. I can tell you that. I've been in June, it will be 41 years that I'm doing this, and I still feel all of the fulfillment and joy covering sport and being a part of a sport environment. So in this session, which will be just about an hour long, as Andrew just said, we want to go through mastering interviews and building athlete stories. We also want, based on the objectives of this program, to get our participants to understand the art of interviewing athletes, learning how to craft compelling athlete stories, and gaining insights into professional sports journalism. So those are, the main headline topics that we want to address. As I go through the slides, I'm going to encourage everyone to make an input. Whenever I go through a slide, I will invite any comment or any opinions or any inquiries that anyone may have, because I don't want to be talking straight and sounding like a monologue, because I want this to be as interactive as possible. The main thing Andrew and Jessica had presented to me when I was first asked about this was the interviewing arm of our job, which is one of the most important aspects of being a journalist. If you master the interviewing techniques, it sets you up really well for the rest of your job. So I'm going to spend some time talking now about the art of interviewing, and we, at the end of each of these segments, I would want us to, at the end of each slide, I would want us to sort of just, participate in what I've presented and give me an idea of how you read into what I've said, and how you, if you have any inquiries. The first thing in the art of interviewing, preparation for an interview, your research, as is the case with almost everything in broadcasting, is really, really critical. You have to prepare a detailed profile of the person that you're going to interview. The sports history of the person. Is also helpful to check previous interviews that that person would have done, so that it can give you all the tools to be thorough in being able to interview the person properly, and also pivot, and in many cases rebut or expand on some of the things that the interviewee might say. So researching before you do your interview, researching your interviewee is really, really critical. I can tell you that that sets you up for a good, fruitful interview. So don't underestimate the value of work prior to doing the interview. Physically, when you get to the venue or the interview location, one of the key things is to put your interviewee at ease, because you would understand that people are different, and there are people who are not necessarily eager to do interviews. You have people who are shy. You have, people who are, less expressive than others. So one of the key things is to just put your interviewee at ease. One of the techniques for that is just to have a nice, good, casual conversation before the interview actually starts, to allow the person to just be relaxed enough to do a proper interview. It is also a practice of ours to reduce the microphone and camera fright by putting those things right there on spot before you actually start the interview, because for especially the ones who are less experienced, the scene of a mic or a camera can be a little unsettling. So you want to have them relax in the atmosphere with the camera right there, or if it's just radio, the microphone right there, so they will feel less intimidated. I would say, though, that a lot of times they are very relaxed prior to the interview starting, even with the mic and the camera there. But as soon as you start the interview and they recognize that the action actually starts, they can get a little, less, forthright in how they interact with you. But that is something that is on you to make them relax as much as possible. But you want to put them into a conversational mode so that you can get the best out of your interview. An interviewer may be asked to suggest certain questions he or she would like to discuss. I don't think there's anything wrong with this. You would have had your list of questions prepared, of course, but if you ask them to, just point out anything that they would want to highlight, I don't think there is anything wrong with that, because what that does is to give the interviewee the reassurance that he or she has an opportunity to share some information that is important to them. So there isn't anything wrong with that, even though, as I say, you may have your prepared questions. Depending on how the interview is going to be presented, I would not rule out writing an introduction to get you off to a business-like start, because if it is a presentation, like it's a live presentation, or if you're packaging it to be presented in a formal way, as opposed to just a recorded interview that you're trying to get sound bites from, writing an introduction so your start is concise and to the point is not a bad idea. It's up to you. You may or may not want to do that, but that is something that is an option for you, as I said, depending on how you want to present. So that is the first phase of this interviewing segment. And before I move to the next slide, if there's anything anyone wants to ask, given what I've just presented about actually preparing for the interview, you can chime in now before I move to the next slide.
Brian has his hand up. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, just a question as it relates to putting the interviewee at ease. Um, are there any tips as it relates to body language? Like, how do we show who we're interviewing that, okay, um, I'm getting what I want from you, and this is completely okay, just to um take the nerves off?
Yeah, well, the first thing is a smile. The first thing is a smile. A smile does a lot. And just, light conversation, crack a joke or something, or just um your body language and everything, just you just say and do things to ensure that the person doesn't feel too nervous or uptight about what's going to come next. So it is usually a good start to just smile, and just say very casual things to just lighten the ear so that the person can feel as if they are relaxed enough to conduct the interview. That's usually a good start.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else from anyone? All right, let me move on to the next slide, because one of the things about being a successful, several things to being a successful interviewer, you would know that when you're interviewing someone, you're actually being the proxy for the viewer or the listener. You have to know that viewers and listeners would like to be in your position to be doing this interview. So it would be important for you to make sure that you get questions in that people want answers to, because you are now the mouthpiece for the people watching or listening to your interview, whether it's TV or radio. Bringing out the personality of the interviewee is very important, because when you're interviewing someone, that person is the star of the moment. A lot of presenters have big egos, and they sometimes feel that the spotlight is on them, but you are really the conduit to get people to understand and to know more about the person you're interviewing. So you have to coin your questions to bring out the personality of the interviewee. Listen carefully to the answers. This is very, very important. And be prepared to depart from your listed questions, because you'll have your list of questions, but it is very important that you recognize that the interviewee will or can say things that can influence shifting the direction of the interview into another path. I remember last year we were doing an interview with Julie and Alfred on the Sportsmax Zone. This is our daily sports talk show on Sportsmax. And this was before the Olympics, and she was in her indoor season. I think she had just won the world indoors, 60 meters. And we were talking to her about aspects of her career. And she mentioned lacking confidence. And when we pressed her on the issue of lacking confidence, then she launched into a whole conceding about how she was nervous, and she started to pressure herself, and she went through periods of depression and so on, and self-doubt. And all of this came because we asked her to explain about the self-confidence or lack of self-confidence that she just spoke of. So this wasn't a part of what we thought the interview would entail. But because she said she was lacking confidence, we took that as an opportunity to press her, to make her speak more about it. And it turns out that she had a lot to say about it. So that is one instance of, or an example of, making sure that when your interviewee says something that is potentially very, influential to the overall discussion, we don't miss the opportunity. So I just want to emphasize that be prepared to discard your your listed questions. If it is that things come up in the interview that become at that point more important or seemingly more more valuable as far as information is concerned. Obviously, you don't ask open-ended questions that require answers. Well, you have to ask questions that require answers that would be more than just a yes or a no. So, you know, you ask what, when, why, where, how, those kinds of questions. You know, don't just ask a question, did you feel nervous? That's gonna be a yes or no. So ensure that your questions are crafted in a way to ensure that the interviewee is able to speak and expand on the questions that you've asked. Another thing, you have to maintain control of the interview, keep the interviewee on the subject. There are times you're interviewing someone and they drift away and taking the interview in a direction that you don't necessarily want. Obviously, if it is a case of something interesting that the interviewee moves onto, then you grab the opportunity to make it count. You have to also to be alert to identify inconsistencies and ironies in the exchange that you're having. I'll give you two quick examples. I remember many years ago, I think it could have been in the 1980s or early 90s, I was doing an interview at Girls Champs with the San Diego coach. And in those days, Girls Champs was separate from Boys Champs. It was a week before Boys Champs. And typically, Girls Champs would have very few spectators. And he had a class 4 athlete who was starring up the development meets. And she just flopped. I don't know what happened. She just flopped. She was expected to win, and she didn't even get a medal. I think she finished 4th or 5th. And when I asked the coach what happened, he said, "Boy, Lance, I think the crowd got to her." This was a radio interview. I looked up in the stands and I saw about 20 people. I said, "Coach, what crowd?" I said, "What crowd?" Because there wasn't a crowd there. So he had to revisit his statement. And I think he meant the pressure of the occasion, which got to her, because this was no champs. This wasn't one of the development meets that she was starring in. So you can't allow sometimes when you're interviewing someone for them to say something that can be challenged, and you don't challenge it. You have to challenge things that don't make sense, because, you know, for him to say the crowd got the better of her just didn't make sense. As I said, I looked up in the stands and I saw about 20 people there. There was another instance that I could talk about where Trevor Berbick, a former world heavyweight champion from Jamaica, he fought Mike Tyson and was knocked out in 2 rounds. Now, Mike Tyson at that time was a 20-year-old explosive new world champion. He became the youngest world champion ever at 20 years old. And he was knocking out everybody. He knocked out, up to that point, he had knocked out 25 of his 27 opponents. And he knocked out Berbick. Berbick came home to Jamaica. I interviewed Berbick. Berbick told me that Mike Tyson can't punch, and his punching power is overestimated. No, that didn't make sense to me, because this is a live interview on radio now, and I couldn't allow Berbick to just say that and not challenge it. So I said, but Trevor, what you're saying is hard for our listeners to, because as I said, it was radio, to digest, because Tyson was a knockout artist. So there's no way you can tell me that Tyson can't punch that hard, yet he knocked out 25 of 27 opponents before you, and then knocked you out as his 26th opponent. So could it be then that maybe his speed, because Tyson's speed was also something that was a tool that he used to annihilate his opponents? And my point was that, okay, if you don't think he punches that hard, then there must be something why he knocks out people. So is it then that the speed of his punches made his opponents unprepared to take the punch? And then he kind of said that he feels that maybe that is what it was. But I'm just saying that I could not allow him in that interview to say that Mike Tyson's punch is not all that, when everybody can see that Mike Tyson's punch is all that and more, because he knocked out everybody. So you have to be alert when you're doing interviews, when people say things that are challengeable. If you don't challenge, a viewer or a listener will say, but hold on, allow him to say that. That don't make sense. So these are some of the things you have to look out for when you're doing interviews, and listen very carefully and be prepared to challenge comments that your interviewee may make. Finally, on this slide, it's good to develop an instinct for asking questions that are out of the ordinary. One of the things that separates people in media is their ability to honor things that a lot of other media entities don't. These are some of the things that will set you apart from a regular or just an average reporter or an average broadcaster. Things like asking people about their hobbies or things to do with their families sometimes will take the interview in a direction that you will be very pleased to see it, unearthing some information that you didn't necessarily bargain for. I remember when Curtly Ambrose was a top fast bowler for the West Indies team, somebody asked him about his family and so on. And it was then that he gave a story about his mom, that every time he took a wicket in Test cricket, his mom, who lived in suites in Antigua and Barbuda, would go outside and ring a bell. So she would ring a bell at 10:13 in the morning because Ambrose just took a wicket. 15 minutes after that, him take another wicket, and she go out and ring the bell again. And this is information that came out because someone spoke to him about his family and that kind of thing. So when you're doing interviews, just recognize that a lot of what will come out in your interview can become stories for the future and can become sound bites for different, media outlets. And people will always say they heard it first on your platform when Curtly told us about his mom ringing the bell every time he took a wicket. So those are some of the key points about being a successful interviewer. And if there is any comment for those points that I just made, I could welcome.
Shamar,
Yeah.
I see two hands up. Shamar, you can go. You're first. Shamar,
Yeah.
you got a question? Okay, if not, then Taj, you can go.
Not hearing.
Yeah, we're not hearing either of you guys. You're on mute. You guys have questions? Shamar or Taj?
Yes, sir. Just to make something clear to me, for the third point,
Yes.
you're saying that we should be able to pivot from conversations just in case something pops up about the event or something that you researched, that you should be able to pivot from the original conversation.
Yeah, the point here, you mean with listen carefully to the answers and be prepared to depart from your listed questions? Yeah, that's just basically
Yes.
saying that you will have a set of questions that you want to ask. But there are times that in asking those questions, the answer that the interviewee gives will trigger an important point that you don't want to miss. So instead of moving to your next prepared question, press the interviewee on what he or she just said, and you will find that you have a whole new story unfolding in the interview that you didn't necessarily bargain for. So it is part of why you should listen carefully to the answers, so that from the answers given, it can trigger whole new information in the interview that, you know, you probably didn't think would come out of the interview.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you just answered what I was going to ask. I was asking, how do you maneuver knowing how and when to press your interviewee?
Well, as I said, in the case of, it's a matter of listening to what the answers are, right? And as I said in that piece, when Julian Alfred told us, because we were talking about her career and building up to the Olympics and that kind of thing, and just basically talking about her plans and her next meet and so on. So that's where the interview was going. But when she said that she ran at a meet recently and she didn't win, and it made her lose confidence. And she at that point made it clear that sometimes confidence is an issue for her. So it was an opportunity for us to ask her or press her more on this confidence issue, because prior to that, we didn't think that she had a confidence issue, because this girl is a star. She win more than she lose. So, you know, if she is hinting at a situation where she doubts her ability, it is something that we want to hear more of. So, which is why I say you listen carefully to the answers given. And in an answer like that, it is obvious to us, it was obvious to us at that point while we were doing the interview, that this is something that we shouldn't let go. We should make her talk more about it. So that is one instance where just pressing on an answer that the interviewee gave allowed us to unearth some things about her that most people didn't know. In fact, I have a video presentation a little later on that will elucidate the point that I'm making about Julian Alfred and her periods of depression and self-doubt that played a very pivotal role in the earlier part of her career that not many people had known about. So you'll see that represent itself when we do the video presentation in a few minutes from now.
I know that you probably would have to be mindful of Julian not being uncomfortable, or being aware that if she would have been uncomfortable during the interview, to not really make the interview look a bit of like a stress for her per se.
Well, as an interviewer, we are not going to worry too much about that. And remember, it was a Zoom interview actually, so we were seeing her. And when you are seeing the person, it gives you a better opportunity to gauge their level of comfort and their body language. And at the time, she didn't seem overly uncomfortable talking about it. So we just pressed the buttons and made her talk more about it. And then as you'll see in the video, she did a BBC interview and she spoke very openly about it. And it was very revealing, the things she said then. But that entire thing was triggered by an earlier interview she had done on Sportsmax, when for the first time for me, I had heard that Julian Alfred had a lot of self-doubt and you know, lacking in self-belief. But she had good people around her that were able to lift her out of that zone. And as we all know, the rest is history. She's Olympic champion.
I see Dylan has a question before we move to the
Yeah.
next
Thank you
slide.
very much.
Yeah, man, no problem.
All right, yes. So good evening, Mr. Whittaker. My question is, suppose an athlete has just been banned for using drugs, and this athlete has done previous interviews where they don't really, whenever you talk about it, they retaliate. What if you want to get an answer to a question about that topic, but you don't want to trigger the athlete or the person that's being interviewed? How do you go around it so you can get some information for your listeners?
Well, the first thing is that if the athlete has agreed to the interview, I would suspect the athlete is prepared to deal with the questions that are going to come, because if an athlete fails a drug test, there's hardly anything else that you're going to want to talk about in the interview. So we would have to put the facts squarely to the athlete, and the athlete would just have to represent him or herself in the best way possible. But we can't powder an athlete in a situation like that. If the athlete fails a drug test, I mean, there are athletes who knowingly take drugs. So it is possible that an athlete could just insist that they never knowingly took drugs. Because as you know, in some of these supplements, athletes end up taking things that they didn't necessarily mean to take, but they are performance enhancing drugs. So I don't think as an interviewer, we would now worry about how the athlete would take our questioning. The athlete is in the spotlight and will have to stand up on his or her 2 feet. As presenters and broadcasters, we can't allow our sympathy, if it is that we feel sympathy for an athlete, to override our job of doing a proper interview. I don't know if that answers your question.
That does. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. I'm going to move on to the next slide now, which is dealing with pivoting while doing interviews. Yeah, this is actually when the interview is ongoing, and things that you can do as an interviewer to ensure that you get the most out of the interviews. I mean, some of the stuff here is kind of straightforward. We talk about the difference between interviewing young, inexperienced athletes versus seasoned professionals. Sadly, a lot of our Jamaican athletes are not very articulate, to be honest, and inexperienced or seasoned. Sometimes there's often an inherent uneasiness in the flow of the interview. But interviewing a young athlete as against a seasoned professional would have its differences, because a seasoned professional would have more background, would have more know-how, and would have more history for you to talk about, whereas a young inexperienced athlete you would more be tackling this athlete on his or her aspirations and so on. Similar approach to star players as against lesser known players or competitors, because they have different platforms. They have different platforms, and the ones who are stars invariably would have done many interviews before. So your interviewing approach to them would be different from a lesser known performer. Athletes dealing with personal struggles or controversial topics. I think Dylan, was it? This is probably down the street that you just went to, because my answer would be similar, that it's hard to be sympathetic when the facts put the athlete in a negative light. In the case of like a positive drug test, if it is something else, as we said, personal struggles or other kinds of issues that an athlete is going through, maybe a death in the family and so on, you have to be sympathetic. You have to make the athlete feel that you are not trying to pressure them too much or so on. It's an opportunity for them to express themselves to the public and how they are dealing with whatever struggles they are going through, because you have to be very skillful in that situation to manage that emotional space. Because I've done interviews where an athlete may start crying, and in an instance like that, no, you have to really be fully cognizant that your interview could fall apart if you don't skillfully maneuver through those moments. A part of your job is to allow the athlete to express him or herself emotionally, but it is one of the things that as an interviewer you learn how to do over time.
If an athlete starts crying, Lance, how do you handle that personally? Or have you had to?
Well, it depends. If you're doing an interview on like the telephone or Zoom and you're not with the person, it is different from if you are physically in the person's space. I would suggest that if you're in the person's space, a gentle touch or an arm around the shoulder would be an approach that you could take that could make a huge difference to how the athlete feels at that moment. It becomes a little more difficult, as I said, if you are not with the athlete. If it's a Zoom interview or a telephone interview on radio or television, it's a little harder. I'm not even sure how to answer how you can deal with it, but the things you say in those moments will be critical. And I would suggest that your first order of business is to be sympathetic and to make the interviewee feel as if you are with them and you're empathizing with their situation, and you in that moment, would be supporting their emotions and not leave them hanging. But as I said, it would be a lot easier if you're physically in the person's space, where a gentle touch or even an arm around the shoulder, could make a huge difference. The other part of this pivoting I want to talk about, and this is where I'm going to show my first video presentation, handling sensitive questions with professionalism. Now, there's an outstanding BBC interviewer called Stephen Sacker. In 2008, in May, he interviewed Bruce Golding, who was the Prime Minister of Jamaica at the time. He was talking about the sensitive issue of the government's stance on homophobia in the country. And a couple of things I want you to watch out for as Sacker pressures Golding on this issue. And when this clip ends, I just want to get a few comments from our participants about what they took from this clip as Sacker interviews then Prime Minister Bruce Golding on homophobia in Jamaica.
Jessica, we're not hearing him.
Yeah.
You're not hearing?
I'm not hearing it either.
Okay, let me retry. Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
I don't know if it will play if I'm on mute. Let me try, and then you can let me know.
You do have a long-standing culture that is.
Can you guys hear?
Yes,
Yeah.
we heard that now. Yes.
Okay, all right.
Very opposed to homosexuality. I believe that is changing. I believe that there's greater acceptance now that people have different lifestyles, that they must be their privacy must be respected.
Are you,
Prime Minister,
are you more accepting now? Because in 2006, you were quoted in the Sunday Herald newspaper as saying, quote, "Homosexuals will find no solace in any cabinet formed by me."
Well, in appointing a cabinet, a prime minister exercises judgment. He exercises that is his exclusive responsibility. There's no right to be in a cabinet.
No, but you've just told me that you believe that Jamaica is on track to give real equality before the law to homosexuals. But you yourself have said that homosexual will find no solace in any cabinet.
That has
formed by
nothing
me.
to do with equality before the law. People,
Do you not have a duty to consider people on their merits for
No,
cabinet positions, indeed in any part of government?
No, I consider people in terms of their ability and the extent to which they are going to be able to exercise their functions with independence.
You also clearly
will have no
and
one.
patently consider them in terms of their sexuality.
No, but that's a decision that I make. That's a decision that every prime minister makes. A prime minister must decide what he feels would represent to the Jamaican people a cabinet of ministers who will be able to discharge your functions without fear, without favor, without intimidation.
Okay. Can anyone just put their hand up and tell me maybe 2 salient things that came out in that clip?
Yes, Brian, go ahead.
Okay, so from the clip, I got that he pulled up the quote from 2006 where he said, I think he said, homosexuals will have no solace in my cabinet. And I think the interviewee, he was just trying to understand, because Mr. Golden said he thinks that Jamaica is in a more accepting place. I think the interview is trying to understand if Mr. Golden is in a more accepting place as it relates to homosexuals. And he was pressing him. He was really pressing him to just get that answer out of him. And I think the fact that he got no answer out of Mr. Golden kind of shows that, or kind of shows to the viewer that he, in fact, there's no change in his thoughts or in his perspective as it relates to homosexuality in the country.
Okay. Excellent, Brian. That's excellent. Anyone else?
I did not hear the part. He was saying something, and I was listening to the interview, and he was asking back a question to Mr. Golden. Like, was like Mr. Golden contradicted himself in one part, but I didn't get that part. I didn't hear that part correctly, so I don't know exactly. But he was questioning Mr. Golden again, as if Mr. Golden contradicted himself.
Well, excellent. And that's the same thing Brian had said earlier, where he was very skillful. First of all, he showed research approach by being able to quote something that Mr. Golding had said 2 years earlier in a Jamaican newspaper, and understand now that this guy is a BBC guy, that he works in England. And because he's doing this interview, he knows that he has to research and prepare himself properly to do the interview. So one, it was impressive that he was able to trigger into the discussion something Golding had said 2 years prior. And you are correct as well, that Mr. Golding was being very unclear about his stance on homophobia, and he pressured him on it, which is what I had said earlier on, that when you're interviewing someone and they say something that doesn't tally in your mind, you have to press them to ensure that they say what they really mean, or you can't be on the fence with something, because Mr. Golding pretty much said that Jamaicans are not as homophobic as they were before, but at the same time he's hinting that his government is not very embracing of it. Later on in the interview, the famous words came out, "Not in my cabinet," when he was asked directly if he would appoint somebody in his cabinet who is gay. And that's when Mr. Golding said, "Not in my cabinet." And that was a soundbite. It was like a soundbite of the century.
To this day.
Huh?
To this day.
Yeah, to this day, not in my cabinet. So even though Jamaicans just say it loosely for different reasons, in other words, them just saying, "No, that's not going to happen with me," people just say, "Not in my cabinet." And I'm just pointing out here that it was because of Stephen Sacker's pressing that elicited that comment from Mr. Golding. So that was another case of an interviewer being very sharp and ensuring that Mr. Golding didn't say something that he wasn't prepared to back up, or he said something that hinted at something, but he needed to be clear about what he was saying. So that is part of your job as an interviewer, to ensure that you get the truth out of your interviewee. The last thing on this slide is handling tough and unresponsive interviewees. And yeah, this is a hazard in our job. You know, when we are faced with interviews that we are asking questions and we're not getting the answers, or we're not getting clear answers, or we're not getting any answer at all, you have to start to find different ways to ask the same questions. There are different situations where an interview can become difficult as well. I remember in 2016, I went to Los Angeles to cover the Special Olympics, and the athletes competing were intellectually challenged. Some of them a little physically challenged as well. And I remember interviewing a Jamaican teenager who just competed in a 50-meter race, but he couldn't walk. So he competed in the race on all fours because he couldn't walk. He used a wheelchair, but for the competition, he just went on his knees and his hands and just crawled like a crab throughout the race. And it was very, very emotional for a lot of people watching. But because of the Special Olympics culture, people are very loving and people are very embracing of the bravery of these athletes. So when he had finished competing and I wanted to interview him, I went over with a camera to interview him, and the people around him were ready now to prop him up on a wheelchair to do the interview because, you know, he was really low. He was just flat on the running track. And I said, no wheelchair. And I just sat on the track beside him and came right down to his level and just put my hand on his shoulder and, you know, smiled. And his whole body language and everything was just so receptive because I just sat beside him. So you have to think quickly sometimes when you're in these situations where an interviewee may be in a position that they may feel a little subdued or a little, you know, less than, you know, being how they want to be portrayed. And it is good sometimes if you are sharp enough to just meet them at their level. So I just sat on the track with him and interviewed him. And a lot of people spoke about the interview because they felt it was just such a good touch. So those are some of the pivoting cases when you're doing interviews, that things will not always, you know, fall in a comfortable zone for you. So you have to be prepared. Before I move to the next slide, any questions or anything anyone wants to say?
Shamar, you have a question?
Yeah, the interview in order for that interview to be sharp, you must have prepared very well. Just wanted to note that. Also, how do you maneuver an interviewee being disrespectful or leading? What maneuver that overall?
You mean if the interviewee is being disrespectful to you?
Yeah, as the interviewer.
Yeah. What? Give me an instance where you think an interview could be disrespectful.
For example, probably you're conducting an interview.
Yes.
Flowing on well, and probably a question from me doesn't sit well with that interviewee.
Well, you have to defend yourself. You know, if you are doing the interview, you have to defend yourself, and you have to stand up for the position that you have taken. Because I believe, generally speaking, if you are preparing to do an interview, you're not going to ask unreasonable questions. If it is that the interviewee feels as if you have asked an unreasonable question, to me, it is in your purview to qualify your question to make the listener or the viewer understand that you are asking a legitimate question. So if it is that an interviewee feels disrespected or feels as if they want to lash back at you because of a question that you asked, I believe that you need to be firm in your position and hold firm to the position that you took, because I don't think you should have asked any unreasonable or disrespectful questions that would solicit that kind of response from an interviewee. Having said that, if it is a live interview as opposed to a recorded interview, it gives you different options. If you're doing a recorded interview and it really becomes blatant, you can stop the interview. You know, if you're doing a live interview now on radio or television, it is a little bit more uncomfortable to just abort an interview. But there are times when that has to be done. You know, if an interviewee becomes abusive or abrasive beyond a certain point, then I believe as a person conducting the interview, it is up to you whether you pursue it or not. But my first answer to me is the more logical approach, where you should not have asked a disrespectful question. I don't think you should ask a disrespectful question. If it is that the athlete interprets it as disrespectful, you need to stand by your ground and qualify your question to make it clear that you weren't asking a disrespectful question. But sometimes athletes are under pressure, you know. They're under pressure and they feel the need to lash out because they might not like a question you asked, whether the question is legitimate or not. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that insight.
Yeah.
Thanks, Shamar. Brian, go ahead. You have a question?
Just I want to get your insight as an interviewer. How important is it for you personally just to look out for the athlete as it relates to a mental standpoint? Because obviously, as an interviewer, I think your job is to get information, create a narrative, but where does that stop as it gets to the point of just making sure this athlete is okay and they're not put in a position that would damage themselves or damage their reputation or just make them feel a bit uncomfortable?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question, Brian, because I think different interviewers and different media entities may vary a little bit in how they approach what you just asked, because there are people in the media who just want stories and they just want sensation and they want big stories and sensationalism. And in many of those instances, they don't worry too much about how the athlete feels or how the person they're interviewing feels. In fact, they are prone to trigger the athlete to feel uncomfortable so that they can get a response that will, you know, probably highlight what they want to get out of the interview. But from my experience and the kind of person I am not that kind of interviewer, because I believe that sports stars are human beings just like us. You know, people put them on a pedestal and treat them sometimes as if they are some superhuman beings, and they are not. They are humans just like us. They breathe just like we breathe. They eat just like we eat, and they are human beings. So my style is to be understanding to how an athlete may feel in certain situations. Having said that, you still have to balance that against you getting the story or treating a story in the way that's applicable as a news person. In other words, you can't be completely soft on an individual because you realize that you are putting them under emotional stress. The fact is, there are issues quite often in sport that have to be dealt with, and there's a point at which you have to ask certain questions. It is up to the athlete or the person. It might be an administrator, because in sports we don't always just interview athletes. We interview administrators. We interview presidents of associations. We interviewed different people involved in sport. And sometimes when there's a controversial issue that puts that person in a bad light, they have to face the music. They have to face the music. I'm just saying that there are some people who enjoy pressuring these people to the extent that they will get more explosive responses from them, as opposed to someone else who is just trying to get a story, but at the same time tries to do it as skillfully as possible, that you don't overly destroy the person's mental space. But that's just me. As I said, depending on your media entity or who you're working for, people will vary with that kind of approach. So I'm not sure if that's an adequate answer for you.
Yeah. I'm very satisfied with the answer. Just one more question. How sustainable do you think that is if you go into interviews with the mentality, okay, I'm trying to get the most dramatic response out of this athlete? Do you think it ever gets to a point where you have to worry about if these athletes are going to want to work with you again, as opposed to somebody that just keeps the interviews more traditional?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't want to use the term that you would have to worry about it, because there are people who won't worry about it. And the fact is, there are athletes who refuse to do interviews with certain people and certain entities because of what you just said. If an athlete feels that they are being targeted unfairly by a media house, they have shown the willingness in the past to refuse to do any interviews, which is kind of sad, because some of the times it's not, it may not be anything unfair. You know, you may be doing commentary on a football match and you will say, you know, Messi had a bad game. He played a bad game, which is the truth. He played a bad game. Messi is told that you as a commentator said he played a bad game, and he doesn't want to do any more interviews with you, which is unfair. But to me, if an athlete takes that position, to hell with them, because you're just doing your job. But athletes do, you're hitting on something important there. There are athletes who, if they feel hurt or in any way disrespected by any interviewer or any media host, it is not uncommon for them to refuse to do interviews. But I'm saying that as a broadcaster, I can't worry about that. I have to do my job. And if I'm being fair in my criticism, if the athlete doesn't like it and refuses to do an interview with me subsequently, that's a bridge that I have to cross somewhere down the road. But I'm not going to allow an athlete's inability to take criticism to stop me from saying something that is legitimate or fair in from a critical standpoint. That's good?
Yes, thank you.
All right. I think we just ended off on the interviewing segment. I hope that the participants got a good sense of interviewing technique and how you maneuver doing interviews, because as I said, interviews are a critical part of our job, whether you're just a broadcaster or you're a writer of news. Doing interviews is a real critical part of our job, and mastering interviews goes a far way into deciding your success on the job. So if there isn't anything more from the interviewing standpoint, I would move on to the next slide.
Well, Taj has a question. One last question, and we can move to the next slide.
All right, Taj.
Yes, good evening again. I would like to know, based on the Mark Golding interview with the homosexuality, I realized that the reporter had a sort of press and pivot style. Like, he was pivoting based on Mark Golding's answers and was pressing him to find out more information from him about what his preferences are in his cabinet. So I was wondering if a press and pivot style would be recommended with sports athletes, because some of them would be more aggressive towards the pressing style. So I was wondering if it would be recommended.
That's a very good question. Before I answer that question, I would say that Caribbean athletes tend to be a lot more sensitive than a lot of other athletes globally. So in the Caribbean, we are very cognizant of the fact that if you use that approach, it's gonna be difficult for you to consistently get the kind of interviewing agreements that you would pursue. I would say though that this program that Bruce Golding was on with Stephen Sacker, the name of the program is Hard Talk. That's the name of the program, Hard Talk. And Stephen Sacker was known as a very confrontational and aggressive interviewer who was not afraid to put his interviewees under pressure. So because the name of his program was Hard Talk, it justifies his style of interviewing, because that's what that is for. I would say that generally speaking, in sports journalism, there's probably less need for that, although there are stories that will require that. But as a general approach to doing interviews in sports, I would say that Stephen Sacker's style may not be the most ideal, but I would add very quickly that there are times when it is necessary.
Okay, sir, I understand now. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. We're running a little bit behind time. I want to go quickly now to another segment. Let me see where I am now with this. I'm trying to get this to, yeah, where we're crafting and engaging athlete stories. So the question is, what makes a story stand out? You identify key angles, personal struggles, achievements, rivalries, behind the scenes moments. These are some of the triggers that you use to make a story interesting, as we try to highlight the fascinating side of sports journalism. Capturing emotion and personality. You remember earlier on, I touched on the Olympic champion Julian Alfred battling low confidence and depression. I'm going to present the video now, which I spoke about, and you can check out what she says. It's a TNF Worldwide presentation, taking the narrative of an athlete dealing with things that a lot of people just looking on and seeing the athletes in the moment of glory may not recognize. And this is just a feature that illustrates how this star athlete was going through so much, to the extent that she almost quit the sport before her Olympic glory. And all of this was not evident to the general public. It's not too long. It's just 2.5 minutes, I think. So check out this video with Julian Alfred, done by TNF Worldwide.
Julian Alfred, the reigning Olympic champion in the women's 100 meters, recently revealed to BBC Sport the moment she almost gave up on her dream. Early this season, Julian Alfred was dealing with personal struggles, physical setbacks, and the weight of high expectations. It got so tough that she asked her agent to cancel all her meets. Yes, she was ready to quit her sprinting career, and probably we wouldn't be here referring to her as the reigning Olympic champion.
It was so hard for me to get back on the track. I was motivated. I felt like there was this heavy weight on my shoulders that I just couldn't shake off. And there was a race in particular in Austin where I didn't do well. And I had to talk with my agent and my coach, but I felt like I'm not there anymore. I told my agent to cancel some of the meets that I had to attend.
But you're probably wondering what led to this low point, right? Well, Julian opened up about how she was dealing with physical and mental challenges, including struggling with her weight. She was tough on herself and felt that she simply couldn't keep going. But in her darkest moment, her coach, Edric Florial, stepped in to turn things around. In an emotional conversation with her coach, Julian broke down, telling him she was ready to leave the season behind. And they didn't just talk. They cried together, sharing her frustration and pain. And then her coach asked her one question that changed everything. Are you ready to be an Olympic champion? That single question lit a spark, reminding Julian of everything she'd worked for. Julian didn't just go back to training. She found a way to stay mentally strong. Before each race, she writes down her goals and affirmations in a little journal. And before the Paris Olympics, she wrote, Julian Alfred, Olympic champion, along with affirmations like, the world will know my name, I'm unstoppable, it's my race. Her confidence came from her hard work and her belief that she was prepared for this moment. Julian's journey to Olympic gold wasn't just about this season. It's a story of resilience. At 14, she left her home to train in Jamaica, later moving to Texas to study and train at the University of Texas for 5 long years. She made huge sacrifices, talent, but mental strength, persistence, and believing in yourself, even when things feel impossible. From TNF Worldwide, we appreciate Julian Alfred for her courage to share her depression story and wish her a mentally energized season ahead. So there you have it, guys. Julian Alfred shares her depression story. And from what you've heard, depression is real, and even elite athletes are not immune to this monster.
Yeah, so that was an illustration of Julian Alfred willing to talk about something that she didn't have to, and it gave us a clearer insight as to what went on behind the scenes prior to her Olympic success. And a lot of these stories you can get with athletes when you build a good relationship with athletes. I want to say something quickly here, because it's important for us to build up a network as journalists of key stakeholders that you gain their confidence and they're willing to talk to you. There's a line, though, that you have to draw, because you don't want to get too close to some of these athletes to the level that you feel that your hands are tied. And if there is a negative story that comes out, you don't want to do it because they are your friends. You have to strike a good balance between earning the respect and trust of the athletes, while at the same time making the athletes know that you are a journalist, right? And your job is to report accurately to your audience about what is happening. Before I get any comments on that video, I just want to complete just this segment here where I spoke about structuring a strong narrative when you're building stories, because the power of storytelling in sports journalism is very, very important. And I thought that feature was really good. The way the sentence structures and the words the narrator used, I found riveting, and it made you want to listen to the next 10 seconds, the next 20 seconds about what was going to be said. I want to say quickly that when you're in the field of the media, your work is constantly compared to other people's work. When something happens at the stadium in a Jamaican context, the Gleaner, the Observer, the 20 other radio stations, CVM, TVJ will cover it. If you are covering the event, you have to ensure that your coverage stands out, right? You cannot approach coverage of an event as just, doing the basics. You have to find angles that will set you apart from the other people covering the event. This is what will count to your credibility, the respect that viewers and listeners will have for your work, because they have seen where you have found angles and dealt with some issues that other media houses didn't. I do a weekly racehorse program on Thursdays on Sportsmax. And just quickly, 2 Saturdays ago, this horse called Commandant won the feature race at Caymanas Park, and it ran in a fast time of 1:24.61 seconds. It was the fastest 7 furlong run so far for the year. And my program was the only one that said that, because CVM didn't say it, TVJ didn't say it, the other radio stations didn't say it, Gleaner didn't say it, Observer didn't say it. And it was the fastest 7 furlong run for the year so far. So that is an illustration of you putting some information out there that nobody else had. Now, I will say that there are certain sports that the statistical platform and information on internet and so on is readily available. So it's not hard to find those things. In other words, if somebody runs a world lead, all you have to go is World Athletics and you know the top list performers, and it's easy. But at Caymanas Park in local horse racing, they don't really have that. So what I do after every race day, I make a listing of the fastest times that were run for the day on that race day, so that I can compare times throughout the year. The Racing Commission has that information, but you would probably have to call them. But I feel that that is like vital information. Sports people like statistics, and they like rankings, and they like to compare performances. And you have to find a way to make sure that when you are reporting, you tap into some angles and you get some areas of your coverage that maybe a lot of other newspapers or radio stations or television stations wouldn't have. Examples of great athletic stories on the slide that you're seeing there. You know, Jamaica is gifted in track and field especially, and there are stories to be told about like a Merlin Otti who ran at the stadium for the first time as a teenager barefoot. She was poor from Hanover before she transferred to Veer Technical, and she eventually became a world champion. And up to now, her world record for the 200-meter indoor still stands at 21:87. So stories like those are riveting stories that, you know, as a journalist living in her time, it is like a pleasure to report on what Merlin Otti did. Usain Bolt, the country boy from Trelawney, who as an 11-year-old would never dream that 9 years after that he would be regarded as one of the greatest sports stars of all time. So people like these give you a platform to tell a story, because that's what we do daily. We tell stories. And as a journalist, individually, our job to me is to tell the story better than anyone else can. And that is something that I tackle every day. Every day when I come to work and I have stories to work on and I have an interview to do, my aim is to bring out some information that I think no one else may have or no one else may treat in the same way. But this is a very fulfilling job, being a sports commentator. And as I said before, I would encourage anyone who has the passion to pursue sports journalism to go right ahead. It's really fulfilling. And it may sound, you know, sort of cliche, but, you know, you end up meeting some world stars that, you know, you probably never dreamt that you would be in a situation where you could be interviewing people who, you know, when you were growing up, you just saw them as untouchables or people who were out of your reach. I know that the social media platform now brings everything closer. So whether it's IG or Facebook or TikTok or whatever, people can condense a global platform into a smaller space. But like when I was growing up and when I just came into the business, there was no internet or anything like that. So you know, the networking and meeting people face to face and developing your craft by you know, constantly putting yourself in the space, you know, would have been beneficial to me throughout my career. So that's pretty much winding up this session. We're on overtime, but I appreciate the participation from everyone. And I think Andrew and Jessica will have a question and answer segment if they are ready. I think we could start there. And before that, maybe if anyone wants to comment on the Julian Alfred piece that we ran just now, because I thought it was a riveting story and told us some aspects of her career that was not widely known.
Thank you so much, Lance. I mean, if anyone has any questions, we're going through the questions throughout the presentation, so I'm probably covered most of them. But just stick your hand up, I'll address it. Personally, Lance, this was very, very helpful for me. I mean, I'm not a sports journalist, but I'm in media, and I learned a lot today. I want to just say thank you. In terms of the Julian Alfred interview, it was very emotional for me. I thought that they did an excellent job with that 2-minute clip. And what stood out to me is the balancing facts with the emotions and keeping the audience engaged. You know, it really hit me. So I learned that, and I wanted to highlight something else, because we've seen the submissions from you guys. Mm-hmm. And I want to say I was very, very, very impressed, and I learned a lot from them as well. And I'm gonna single out I think it was Brian's piece on Milligan. What's his name? The pole vault. Yes. Mm-hmm. That was an excellent piece, because it brought you through his day, but then there was a section on it where they spoke about his performance last year and the fact that the pole broke with him. And not only did you mention it, but you had a clip of it. I was like, wow. Right at the moment they were talking about it, you see the pole just snapped and him fall on his back. So I really felt like that did a really good job, similar to what Lance is trying to express here today. So I want to encourage everybody, go through all the videos. Please go on the page, watch the videos, see what your colleagues are doing, and you can learn from it and apply some of those aspects as well. But yeah, I will hand over. I'll hand over back to you if there are any questions. I don't see any hands up, but we are over time a little bit. So I guess we could close off if no other questions are there, or anyone has any last words or anything like that.
It was an excellent piece from the interviewer. I'm sorry, ladies first.
All right. Yeah, I heard someone speaking. Well, a couple of people. Shamar has given the floor to someone else. For now, Dylan, I see your hand raised.
Okay, so this isn't really a question, but this is about the Julian Alfred video. What I liked about that video is that it shared her struggles, but it also helped relate to people who might be depressed, so they can kind of understand that even the most famous people in the world, the people who seem superhuman, have their own emotional struggles too.
Excellent. That's the point we're trying to make as well. You know, they are human beings just like us, and sometimes we put these people on a pedestal and expect them to be superhuman when they aren't. You know, they have flaws just like us. They have strengths and weaknesses just like us. In many instances, they have far more weaknesses than us. They may have some strengths that will put them, you know, on a pedestal because of their success as sports stars, but personally and from a character standpoint, a lot of them have a lot more weaknesses than you and I have, and dysfunctional behavioral patterns and all of that. But a lot of times, because they are stars, people overlook them. But they are human beings just like us, so that's a good point there.
Thanks, Brian. You have your hand up.
Yeah, just to add something to the Julian Alfred story. Uh, in 2023, she was going through the NCAA circuit, and she didn't lose a 100-meter race that whole year up until World Championships final. She finished 5th in that final. So she obviously had a very successful year for somebody who was just about to leave college, and it just shows that you really can't gauge how an athlete is feeling just based off their success, because the business for them, it's so demanding. They all exhibit signs of just they challenge themselves so hard that literally any bit of failure can just put them in a mental position where you just have to look out for them.
I just want to touch on that. Track and field is really a solo sport compared to other sports. So that mental fortitude, especially if you don't have a coach that is close to you or someone in your corner, it can be really like hell-like situation for that athlete or for majority of athletes per se.
Yeah, good. That's a good point. That's a good point. You know, individual sports, as you say, like track and field and tennis, and you know, them things where your appearance is singular. You know, all the pressure is on you. You know, your success is yours, your failure is yours. In a team environment, things can be a little different. So, while I'm not suggesting that people in team sports don't have mental pressure, I think I would agree that, you know, the people who do individual sports face a lot more internal struggles with their overall appearance and application of their craft on stage. Good point.
Excellent points, guys. I'm gonna let us wrap up now. We went over by half an hour, but it was all good. And Lance, I want to thank you again, man. This was really, really, really helpful. That every week we get better, more engaging and more interesting. Talia, you had something to say. I think you were talking before. You just put your hand up. If you want to say something, you can go ahead and say. We'd love to hear from you. But you said it's okay. All right, Talia. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Lance, a couple of things you mentioned, you know, we've heard over and over, and I want to reinforce it for everybody who is here. Research. That's what sets you apart, really. Listen during the interviews. Listen to whoever you're speaking to. Make sure you are not off in the distance, and that is how you really, really can zone in on what is interesting and develop an interview from there. Stay open-minded, or stay open in terms of the direction of your conversation and interviews, and meet them on their level. I thought that was a novel one. So, you know, don't know, you know, try and get on their level when you're doing the interviews. I know there's a lot more in terms of what we learned today, but those are just some of my key takeaways. And I want to thank everyone for participating in terms of the just some housekeeping stuff. You know, I'll deal with that. In terms of the challenges, we will receive your grades. Yeah. Feedback. If not tonight, tomorrow. So you can look out for that. I think it was a fantastic first challenge, and I'm looking forward to all the content for the next one, guys. And again, I just want to say, Lance, big up, thank you. And we hope to have you again in the next version of this.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. And my final advice, as you may be seeing on the screen, dedication and passion, man. Watch words for our business. Our thing is not a 9-to-5 job. It's a lifestyle, being a sports journalist or being a broadcaster. Overall, your goal is to build credibility and respect, and that comes from quality work. And it's something that we have to live. You know, my work continues even after I leave the office. So if you're not prepared to dedicate that kind of time and passion into the business, it's likely that you're not going to be as successful as other people who go the extra mile. But I appreciate sharing my experience with the crew. And thanks again, Andrew and Jessica. It's been good for me as well.
All right, guys. Well, everyone have a good night. Lance, get home safely. And Jessica, thank you so much for your coordination and behind the scenes work. It's not possible without you. All right, guys. Take care.